Alright, my friends, we're adding and subtracting fractions today. And so remember, the key thing for adding and subtracting fractions is that we need to find a common denominator. Okay, so that's why we were doing that in the last lesson, so that it can prep us to do the adding and subtracting fractions so we know how to find common denominators. What I've done here is I've just shown you kind of typically what happens. You could have at least two fractions, and what you want to do is once you get them to have the same denominator, so if you see here I have C and C, once you get them to have the same denominator, you keep the denominator, so you don't combine the denominator. You keep it the way it is, and all you do is you combine the tops. So when you're adding the two things together. When you're subtracting, you're going to subtract. And subtracting gets a little tricky because sometimes we're going to have to distribute a negative, so I'm going to show you how to do that in number 1. Okay, so we're going to add or subtract. Let's start with number 1, just like I said, and here is my suggestion here. So look at how many fractions we have. So in this number 1, see how we have two fractions. There's this first one and the second one. On your next line on your binder paper, write out the fraction line. So here's the first fraction line, which will go with the m over 3. Here's that minus sign that's separating them. And then here's the second one. Okay? The reason why I do this is I think it might be helpful, so just try it out and see. Now looking at the denominators, we're going to work on finding common denominator first. So looking at 3 and 12, what is their common denominator? Their common denominator is 12, right? So what I'm going to do is on this next line, for both of the denominators in the fraction bars, I'm going to write a 12. Okay? And the way that this is going to work is we're going to, remember, whatever we do to the bottom, we're going to have to do to the top. This is really similar to what we did the last lesson. So how do you get from 3 to 12? To get from 3 to 12, you times 4, right? So if you times 4 on the bottom, you're going to have to times 4 on the top. So the top is going to end up being 4m. Okay. For the second fraction, since the denominator was already 12, there was no difference. So there was no difference there, so I just leave it the way it was. Okay, and now what we do is we're going to combine the two fractions into one. So like I said, you're not going to do anything with the denominators. Once you've gotten them to be the same, they stay the same, so you leave them there and you combine the tops. So on the top for the first fraction I have 4m, and then I have that minus sign, but I'm stopping right now because if you look at the numerator after a minus sign, so here's the minus sign, if you look at the next numerator, if there's more than one thing, I'm going to tell you to put those things in a parenthesis. So get in the habit of doing that because you're going to get messed up. So one more time. If you have a problem that's a minus sign when you're adding or subtracting fractions, if you have to subtract fractions, find the minus sign. So here's my cursor right here. Find the minus sign, look at the thing directly to the right of it, the numerator directly to the right. So in this case it's 6m plus 3. If the numerator has more than one thing in it, so it has a 6m and it has a 3, if there's more than one thing, you need to put that numerator in a parenthesis, because what you're going to have to do with that minus sign is you're going to have to distribute it to the 6m, and you're going to have to distribute it to the 3. Okay, so what my real numerator is going to look like is 4m minus 6m minus 3, and that's over 12. And now you just combine now. So 4m minus 6m on the top is going to give me negative 2m. Let's do this. And then I have a minus 3. Then I have a 12 here. And so, final answer for this is negative 2m minus 3 over 12. Alright, let's look at the second one. So same idea, same thing we do. So look at the fractions. We have two of them, so I'm going to put two fraction lines. And then that minus sign in the middle. Okay. Now we need to get a common denominator, so looking at just the number part of the denominator, the common denominator between those guys is 12, okay? And then looking at the y's, what we're going to aim for is we're going to aim for getting a y to the third, because you want to get them to be the same, the greatest common or the least common denominator. Okay, so that ends up being y to the third. And so now what we do is, remember, how did we get from 6y to 12y to the third? We multiplied it a 2y squared. So if I do that on the bottom, I'm going to have to do that on the top. Okay, so what do I have here? I have 5 times 2y squared is going to be 10y squared. Okay, so that's how I fix the top of that first one. And then looking at the second fraction, from 12y to the third to 12y to the third, there was no change, so that 7 stays. Remember, now the next step is to keep the denominator, combine the tops, and oops, I have a minus sign again, so let's look at the numerator. The numerator is only 7, so I don't have to put the 7 in a parenthesis. Remember, I don't have to do the parenthesis unless there's two things there in the numerator. Since the 7's by itself, no parenthesis needed, and we're done with this problem. Okay. Let's get into one, now that hopefully you kind of got the swing of this. Let's get into one that's a little more involved. And it's a little more involved because we're going to have to factor the denominator. Okay. So, here we go. I have two fractions here. Okay, and then let's factor this guy out. So anytime you can factor, factor. So what do I have? I have 1 and 1, 5 and 3. I'm adding to get the middle number. So I have this. Alright, so these are my factors. Remember, because I have a plus here, that means that both of my things are going to be plus plus. Okay, same sign, plus plus, because the first sign is plus. So I have I group them going across. So I have an n plus 5, and then an n plus 3. And then this one was an n plus 3. So let's say this step I didn't do anything to change the denominators yet. I just factored. So this is n plus 9. So this step was not finding a common denominator. This step was to factor first. Okay, so now I'm going to go and do the common denominator. And remember, for the common denominator, you want one of everything. So I have an n plus 3. So I'm going to keep that n plus 3. I have an n plus 5, so I'm going to keep that. I have an n plus 3 again, but I already wrote that down, so I don't have to write it again. So my common denominator is going to be n plus 3 times n plus 5. Okay. Now looking at the denominators here, I have from there to there, so what's new? I started with an n plus 3, now I have an n plus 5 also on the bottom. So what's new is that I now have to multiply an n plus 5 there, and then an n plus 5 there. So what do I have here? I have, on the top now, I have an n times n plus 5. Okay, and then here on the second fraction, I have nothing new. I just have an n plus 9, right? Nothing changed in that second one. So the process for this, once you guys have fixed the numerators, is to keep the bottom and then combine the tops. Okay, and so just simplify that top part. So maybe my gut reaction right now would tell me to distribute that n into the parenthesis, as in, distribute this n, this first n here, maybe distribute that into the parenthesis. So what I'm going to end up having is n squared plus 5n plus n plus 9. My denominator I don't do anything with. Don't worry about distributing it. You can just leave the denominator the way it is. So combine like terms on the top. So the n squared's by itself, all by itself, so I'm just going to rewrite it. I can combine the 5n and n and make it 6n. And then I have that 9, so that 9 just stays. Okay, and then I end up with n plus 3 times n plus 5 on the bottom. And so the top looks like I might be able to factor it. So if you think you can factor it, or if it's factorable, you need to factor it, okay? So let's look at the top. The top looks like I could do the box trick to it. So I have 1 and 1. Maybe for 9 I could do 3 and 3. I'm adding to get the middle number because the back sign's a plus. Okay. So adding to get the middle number is and so that tells me that, remember, because the sign is plus 2, it tells me I'm going to have the same signs in both parentheses. So it's going to end up being plus plus, since the first sign is plus. Okay. Oops, that's a horrible line. I'm so sorry. Okay. There we go. Denominator doesn't change. So let's group here. I have an n plus 3. I also have another n plus 3. Okay. Oh, wait. Can I cancel some stuff out here? Remember, I can cancel stuff if it's a top and bottom combination, if it looks exactly the same. So if you look at this, I have an n plus 3 on the bottom and the top. So I can cancel those out. And what do I have left in here? I have an n plus 3 over n plus 5. And that's my final answer. So that one was a super long one, a super involved one. That's probably the toughest it could get, probably because you have to factor. So always check, you guys, this factoring. I keep saying it all the time. This factoring is not going to go away. So if you can factor some stuff, go ahead and factor them out, because we want to get these fractions that we're working on as simple as you possibly can, okay? I have one more to show you, and it's just to practice again with that. See how I have a minus sign again with that, with two things in the top and the numerator. But what I want to show you, actually, what the key thing for this is the key thing for this is, if you look at the denominators, they look kind of the same, right? Except that, what's the difference here? So in this first one, I end up having y minus 5. But in the second denominator, I have 5 minus y. So they kind of are almost the same, except maybe the things are switched up. So I'm going to take this fraction right here, and I'm going to rewrite it so the y is first. So remember, when you rewrite it, you have to observe the sign as well. So for this y, there's a negative in front of it. So when I rewrite it, so it's first, it has to be negative y. And then this 5 right here is just a regular 5. So it looks like that. So if I was to rewrite this blue thing and turn it into what I had in the brown here, it would be negative y plus 5, because I'm writing it so that the y is first. Okay, so here's what I really have for this problem. Again, with that not straight line, I apologize. Here we go. 4y minus 2, y minus 5. I have that minus sign there, and then I have 3y plus 1, and then negative y plus 5. Okay, so I still have an issue, though. I have an issue because I want them to look the same so bad, like those denominators, I want them to look the same so bad. So if you look at them, the main difference is just that they're opposite signs. So like the y is positive here, but the y is negative. The 5 is negative here, but the 5 is positive. When you enter into a situation like that, there's a special trick that I'm going to show you here. What you can do for this is you can take out a negative 1. Okay, so if you take out a negative 1 here, what you're going to have left is you're going to have a positive y, and you're going to have a negative 5. Okay, so you've basically taken out a negative 1 from that brown thing. Here it is before I X'd it out. And so if you pull out a negative 1 from there, this is what ends up happening to it. So I'm Xing it out because that's what we've changed it to. What you can do at this point is that negative 1 and that negative in the middle, or whatever sign that is, you're going to change the sign to whatever it is, to the opposite of it. Okay, so instead of this being a minus sign, it's going to cancel out with this negative 1, because the negative and negative is going to make it a positive. Okay, so here's what I have now again for the problem. So I have a 4y minus 2, y minus 5, So this first fraction rarely gets changed. But remember, because I pulled out that -1, this turns into a plus now. The numerator is not affected. But the denominator, what's going to happen to it now is because you pulled out that -1, you're going to observe this new parenthesis denominator, the y minus 5. So why did we do this? What was the point of doing all that work right there? The point of it was because we wanted the denominators to be the same. They had the potential to be the same, and the only thing that was separating them was the fact that they were opposite signs. So rewind it maybe a couple of seconds, you guys, and see if you're a little confused what happened there. So first step for this was I looked at them from the original problem. The original problem is the thing in blue, and looking at the denominators, I think that they were almost the same, or they could have been the same. So I rewrote it in brown right here. Okay, so I rewrote it in brown with the y's first. So the y was negative, so when I wrote it again, it stayed negative. This 5 was positive, so it stays positive here. Okay, and now looking at the 2, they're almost the same except they're opposite signs. So I pulled out that -1 and rewinded a couple of seconds, you guys, to see how that worked again, okay? But now I'm down here after I've changed the signs and all this business, and the denominators are okay, so I'm at peace. They look exactly the same. You follow the same process where you keep the bottom, combine the top, and hallelujah, because this is a plus, I don't have to distribute any negative, so I can just rewrite it like this. Okay, now let's simplify what we have on the top. So if I combine like terms with the y's, I'm going to get 7y. With just the regular numbers, I'm going to get -1. On the bottom, I have y minus 5. And that is all that I could do with that. So final answer for this ends up being 7y minus 1, y minus 5. So the tough ones for this one might have been number 3 example because of all the factoring, but that one shouldn't be too tough. You just remember to just always check and make sure you can't factor. Number 4 was the tricky one because of the negative and how we had to multiply a -1 and change the sign in the middle. So rewatch number 4, you guys, if that one was a little weird, because I think that if you just see the process of it again, it will be a little bit better. Okay?